Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Wednesday. Hope you are doing absolutely amazing. If you are here, that means that you are on the road to Afrotech and we've made it to session number 3. So as you all are welcoming yourselves into our virtual space, I want you to get ready for an absolutely amazing conversation that we're going to have today as we build upon the series that we've been talking about pertaining to diversity, equity, and inclusion. All series I've been saying that it is the popular girl at the school table because everyone wants to talk about her, right? And we're going to build upon that conversation and talk about these super, super important topics that not only move us forward, but move our organizations, our society, and our culture forward as well. So if you've been around with us, you understand that we laid the foundation in series episodes 1 and 2, and we're here to continue to build upon that. And I think it's going to be an absolutely amazing conversation. So before we officially get started, I want to let you know that you will have an opportunity to submit any questions that you have. We have a Q&A portion right there on your screen. So if you have questions, please submit them there. And toward the end of our conversation, when we have during that designated time, we're going to answer any of the questions that you have related to this particular topic. So if you have them, if something jumps out to you based on someone's response, or if you just had a burning question that you've been wanting to ask the entire time, please put them in the Q&A session. We'll be sure to try to get to them when that appropriate time comes. So with all that being said, understood, and accepted, I am Josh Rogers. I am a DEI manager, a culture maven, and a digital storyteller. And I'm super excited to be with you for the third time in this series on the road to Afrotech as we dig into inclusive leadership, guiding transformation together. Now, if you've been with us before, then you understand that in session 1, we laid the foundation for what diversity, equity, and inclusion is and talked about some of the general points around the strategy and implementation. And then last week, we dived into session 2, where we went a little bit deeper and we talked about how to create inclusive societies and cultures and what that means for actually bringing equity into workspaces. So today, we're going to look at that from a leadership standpoint. And we have two amazing, amazing, amazing panelists who are going to give their perspectives to some issues around guiding diversity, equity, inclusion through executive leadership. So we have Amira Barger, who's with us, and Greg Cunningham. Super, super excited to have them. So I'm going to ask Amira and then Greg to introduce themselves. Tell us who you are, what you do, and then we'll jump right into the conversation.
Thanks so much, Josh. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. Amira Barger. I sit right outside San Francisco, California, and I am an executive, a professor, a writer, a partner, and a mom. And I have the pleasure of working at the intersection of strategic communications, health equity, and racial equity. So I'm a DEI practitioner, but I'm client facing. So at Edelman, that's where I have the pleasure of spending my days. I counsel businesses and nonprofit organizations and governments all across the world on how to advance equity for employees, consumers, and other stakeholders. And it's a pleasure to be here with you all.
Absolutely. Thank you. Greg?
Thanks, Josh. And good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. Amira, it's a pleasure to be on the panel with you. I'm Greg Cunningham. I'm the Chief Diversity Officer here at US Bank, but honestly consider myself an inclusive growth executive. I've always sought to find the intersection of DEI as a catalyst to certainly bring forward equality and equity within organizations, but also to double down on the business case for diversity, which I've always believed is truly about innovation. My background is primarily in marketing. I've been at the bank for 8 years and spent the previous 17 years in brand marketing at Target. So I also, similar to Amira and Josh, consider myself both a storyteller and an executive of purpose. So it's exciting to be with everybody. And I love the Baldwin and Angela Davis and all the imagery behind Amira. So I'm really excited to get into it today.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So glad to have both of you with us. We're going to jump right into the conversation. Amira, what are some of the principles and systems that you believe help guide transformation through diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Oh, I love this question. One of the first things that comes to mind is that trust is often a difference maker at every touch point when it comes to transforming cultures and advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion. And trust is something that we happen to study every year at Edelman, where I get to spend my days. And it's so important because the work of DEI and cultural transformation requires this harmony of art and science. And the art I think of as the interpersonal interactions and the ways that we use our human skills to influence the attitudes and behaviors of people. And then there's the science part, the tools, the techniques, and the methods of organizational change. And four components of trust that I think are really helpful as principles or systems to your question of guiding that culture transformation. The four principles we talk about at Edelman around trust are purpose, ability, dependability, and integrity. So I'll repeat those in case people are taking notes. Purpose, ability, dependability, and integrity. And I really believe that they make the difference. And so to unpack each of them briefly, purpose. Think of that as an organization, are you working to have a positive impact on society and leading and moving with purpose such that your decisions as an individual leader or contributor and as a business entity are aligned with your stated values? A quick example is the Coca-Cola soda company, right? They use a significant amount of water in the production of their products. And to impact their carbon footprint, if you will, they have purposefully partnered with NGOs all across the world to advance clean water initiatives as a part of their purpose to impact society in positive ways and continue to garner trust with the employees and the consumers that look to them. The second component of trust is ability. And as an organization, we work really hard, right? Our businesses, startups, you name it, to prove that we are proven in our field. We're good at what we do. And the same is true for thinking about the DEI practitioners and the leaders within your organization that are guiding transformation. And this is an important point to me as a practitioner, because in the last 3 years, we've seen this sort of upshot of focus on DEI, though the many companies and people were doing this, for years and years before some people became aware of it. But there are people who have a lived experience or multiple dimensions of diversity. Think race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, all those dimensions of diversity. And lived experience is very important to the work of DEI, but it's not the only measure. We also need to have practitioners with ability that has been proven, that not only can they guide the inputs of creating a strategy and a plan, but do they have proven success in terms of outputs and outcomes, meaning they've actually seen some transformation and they've guided it well. So ability is something that's really important, I think, in culture transformation. And that means having the right team members pushing it forward. The third component of trust is dependability. So as an organization or as an individual leader, are you keeping your promises? Are you fulfilling your commitments? Employees, consumers, everyone expects that companies will follow through on their commitments, and individual leaders as well. There's a hyper focus on it, especially because of what has taken place the last 3 years, societally, professionally. And in our trust study at Edelman, 62% of those who responded said that they believe companies are doing a mediocre or worse job of living up to their promises and commitments. So being a dependable leader and being a dependable company is really important to current and prospective employees and consumers, and it will help garner you trust if you stick to what you say you'll do. And the last trust component is integrity. So are you telling the truth, whether it's the truth about your progress in DEI, the truth about what's happening in society? 79% of those we spoke to said, I can trust my employer. And employers right now, compared to government, media, or nonprofit organizations, employers, businesses are the most trusted entity. And so to move forward with integrity, when you think about DEI, one way to do that is to transparently share and publish your progress, even your DEI data. When you think about your gender parity, your pay parity? Are you publishing your DEI data consistently every year? That's one way to garner trust and to advance culture transformation, by being integritous in showing the data that's driving your decisions as an organization and as an individual leader.
No, that is really great. You said some powerful stuff. And one of the things that I took away from even in the four pillars of trust that you just talked about was that there's this science, this technology in it, right? And then I see those four pillars as even all the different variables that make that up. Because if anything is missing, right, I don't think we can actually get to that final trust module. So that's really, really important, especially as employees. We want to be able to depend on what you recruited us on, right? What you sold us on, so to speak,
Exactly.
and to be able to live that out and walk that through with the organization, I think is really, really impactful. Greg, I want to pivot to you a little bit and ask you, from your perspective, how do you implement? You know, we just talked about what some of the strategies are, right? But how do you actually implement that from a leadership level, and how does that lead to eventually changing your culture?
Well, Josh, I think the most important ingredient, in my opinion, in the success equation for DEI is accountability.
Mhm.
There is nothing that drives outcomes more than having, as Amira said, a component of it is transparency. But the other component is there's got to be some consequences for not fulfilling DEI objectives. And consequences aren't always negative. We always think of consequences as some punitive sort of action that's taken. But when I talk about consequences, it also gives us the opportunity to reward those who are exhibiting the behaviors that we want. And so, what gets recognized and what gets rewarded in an organization are the behaviors that employees will role model. And so when you set a performance expectation that includes DEI as a component of performance reviews, incentives, compensation, all of those things will do more to drive culture than any DEI training, any DEI program. You certainly have to have tools of measurement. Scorecards are absolutely important. But this notion of accountability, Josh, is something that we place a lot of emphasis on. It includes sharing DEI results with the board, all of my peers on what we call our managing committee that reports to the CEO. There's got to be an incredible amount of both visibility and accountability to achieving DEI results. The other two things that I would also mention are integral in implementing DEI work is this notion of consistency. We've seen a lot of companies pull back on DEI initiatives in the aftermath of the Supreme Court ruling on affirmative action in higher education. And the reason that you see these companies pulling back is because they were performative to begin with. What I didn't say in my opening, Josh, is I'm here at U.S. Bank. We're the fifth largest bank in the country. We're headquartered here in Minneapolis, which is where George Floyd was literally murdered about 3 miles from where I'm sitting right now.
Wow.
And while it was a transformative moment and a conversation about racial justice and social justice was sparked globally, it hit different here in Minneapolis. Let me say that. And we, like many other companies, began to make financial pledges, and there were these hundreds of millions of dollars in pledges and all these other things, which on the surface is a good thing. We want to see companies sort of lean in, but you've started to see some of those wane. But the difference that we've made is we've actually partnered with National Research Institute like the Urban Institute that's actually helping us measure outcomes. Nobody cares about your hundreds of millions of dollars in pledges, but what they do care about is how you're helping small businesses create jobs, how you're helping individuals in our communities buy homes, which we know home ownership is the number one way that wealth is transferred in this country. It always has been. Those are the kinds of things that you have to measure. And I think this notion of transparency and being able to share specific outcomes is not only an external component to this work, but it also does a lot to sort of help employees believe that the company is truly committed to the work of DEI.
No, that's really good. That were you about to say something, Greg? I'm sorry.
No, I can keep going, Josh, but
No,
I
no,
that
no.
was pause right there.
Yeah, that's really good. That accountability piece is important. I think from, like you said, from a both positive implementation and even thinking about those who may not be as accepting or willing to move, right, as we're moving and we're evolving. And I think having those accountability measures in place further assures that trust that Amira was kind of talking about, right? And how we're able to build up that culture of inclusivity and equity within our organizations. But what happens though, Amira, when we're implementing, we have accountability, we've defined our success measures, we have the data to support the things that we're doing. What happens as from a leadership standpoint when there's somebody on the team who's just resistant to change? How do we deal with them? How do we work with that or work around that?
Yeah. In many cases, I have found in my counsel with clients, it is working around them. The key is to identify the champions, right? So from an asset framing perspective, who are the champions? Who are those who are positively inclined to helping to advance this work? And the second piece, in addition to identifying the champions, is to understand not everyone can or will be moved. And that's something that I've had to grapple with in this work, because I want so much for people to change their behaviors and their mindset and their mental models, and to understand how equity isn't just for those people over there. It helps all of us, right? All ships rise with the tide. And so not everyone can be moved. I think that's an important grounding that people need to do this work with. You won't change everyone's hearts and minds. And quite frankly, that's not the core of the kind of work that I do. Hearts and minds aren't not a part of it, but it's not the most salient part of it, right? Because our goal as DI practitioners is to transform systems, policies, practices, and behaviors. And that means structures and things in place within our institutions that change people's behaviors. It won't always mean it changed their hearts and minds. But identify the champions. Those are the people you need to focus on. And in my work, I spend my days as a consultant. And so I'm often, thinking through and working with frameworks. And so when I'm working with an organization, one of the things that I try to do is identify the champions, right? Those who are passionate, they're knowledgeable, they want to be helpful. Those are people that look like your employee resource group leads. Those are often champions of this work. Those who are potentials, they might be passionate about the ideas of equity, inclusion, and diversity in their private life, but maybe they haven't ventured there in their professional life in being, loud or forward thinking about it. Maybe they need some additional training or language, and they just haven't been tapped with a specific role to play in advancing DEI, because it is everyone's work. And sometimes those potentials just need someone to point out the very specific way they can help advance equity, and then you've got them and they turn into champions. Another group I think about is those who are apathetic. They're not actively harming your DEI efforts. It's sort of, they're passive about it, right? They know that it's happening. They feel a little overwhelmed and burdened by it, but they're not actively harming it. They're just sort of there. They're apathetic. And then there's the detractors, to your point and your question, is they think that DEI is everyone else's problem, right? It's a zero-sum game. If they get something, I lose something. That's for them over there, not for me. And again, it's that group of people that I find we're often working around. I think a point that Greg made earlier is important. Consequences can be net positive or net negative. And so having incentives tied to those who do help to advance equity in DEI is a positive way to move forward, and tying it to people's performance reviews and to any benefits and features they have in their leadership role, whether that's a bonus structure, advancement to the next level of leadership. As a company, whatever your stated values are, whatever the behaviors that you expect are, if they include DEI and there are detractors who are not living those values, there need to be consequences in place so that it's clear to everyone that as a company, we are modeling, we are serious. And these are the behaviors that we expect, and you need to get on board and be values aligned, or this may not be the company for you.
Now, I love what you said there about how we work around and we work with and we identify the champions. And another individual that I've come across many times in doing this work is the person who believes that they're doing great work, but they're causing unintentional harm.
Mm.
Right? What from your perspective, how do we deal with that individual who's like, they say they're the champion, but they're just, I mean, tripping up over their feet at every turn.
So two things are important here. The call in, not the call out, the call in. Calling out is a valid response in certain cases. But in this one, the call in, calling them in, and then proximity is important. So I find with people of that nature that you just described, who is in closest proximity to them in terms of relationship.
Okay.
Right? Who a person can be moved by often is dependent on the relationship you have with them. Who will they most listen to, whether it's because they have an interpersonal relationship, and sometimes it's because we're leaning into those power structures of they might listen most saliently to the chief diversity officer, to the people and culture team, or to their direct manager, right? Because of a dynamic there. But proximity and relationship matters in terms of helping them be called in to see and hear about some examples of their behavior and the impact it is having on those around them with salient examples. And I find that it's so important in this work to speak in specificities with people. Here's an example of what you said, and here's how it impacted me, or so and so. Here's what I saw happen. What is your take? What do you believe happened? And to have that active listening conversation with specific examples.
No, I love that. I love that approach. And Greg, just getting your perspective on this a little bit, how would you counsel someone, right, from a leadership level who is looking to make changes for tomorrow and do this work of DEI within organizations?
Josh, the first thing I try to do with people is find alignment on the places that we can all agree.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are things that, if there are 50 things we're trying to accomplish, typically when I sit down with people who I would call late adopters to this work, there's probably 5 places where we disagree and 45 where we agree. And I try to focus on the 45. Like, we can all agree that we want to build the most high performing diverse teams. We can all agree we want a culture where everybody can succeed. We can all agree that we're trying to grow the business. And so we start with these places where we can find alignment and agreement. And then, at the end of the day, it comes down to your previous question, which was asking about change. I don't care what kind of change you're talking about. Those that are resistant to change don't last in corporate America anyway. Like, it is the new reality is where I started this whole thing, Josh, and talking about inclusive growth. The new reality in the marketplace is, if you are not committed to inclusive growth, if you are not committed to thinking about the marketplace in the most dynamic and holistic way, if you're not thinking about how to bring innovation into your business, you won't be successful. And that's what DEI is. That is the business case for diversity. It's innovation. It's innovation and growth. Who doesn't want that? And if you start the conversation with, this is about innovation and growth, I find that I have fewer detractors. I find that I have, less dissent in what we're trying to do, because the next question you ask when I say that is, well, tell me what does that mean for me, and what does that mean for my business? And then we can have a conversation from there. The other piece that I always bring to the conversation, Josh, is data, because data is unemotional. You cannot deny the trends, the demographic trends in this country, the demographic trends in the marketplace that have changed the game for how companies need to think about growth. And there isn't an employee in your organization who isn't and shouldn't be thinking about growth. So bringing data along with me into that conversation is always helpful, because this is not about me. It's not about my personal feelings. It's not about my, my personal passion project. This is an unemotional conversation that's supported by data. So we always have to be able to quantify sort of the things and back up with data the things that we're advocating for in this work. So I think that's another crucial part of this conversation. And then the last thing that I would say is, you don't need everybody. This was something I think, Amira, you were saying that we don't need everybody. You're not going to get everybody. You need enough people who understand, and you need a coalition of the willing, and that there will be sheer inertia that the organization, the culture is going to change anyway. And those who don't adopt and adapt to the change will be left behind. And that's a fact, and that's just a reality of sort of the environment that we're in.
I just did a look back, so I wanted to make sure that I had it at the top of reference. Jim Collins' book, From Good to Great, he has the example in there about getting the right people on the bus. Because
Yeah.
when you're riding a bus, right, who's on that bus determines where that bus stops, right? And I think you both said something super amazing in terms of you don't need everybody, because if everybody's on there, we're going to be stopping at places where we don't need to stop, and it hinders our innovation, it hinders our growth, it hinders where we can go ultimately. So I absolutely love those perspectives. But Greg, I want to ask you, when you're also dealing with those individuals, for those who have now taken that data, right? Who've looked at the approaches that you just talked through, how do you then encourage them? Now they're intrigued. How do you then encourage them to go deeper into the work?
I shouldn't need to encourage you at that point,
Sure.
because because at that point, Josh, it goes back to what I said before. Now you're accountable, because it's part of how your performance is going to be evaluated. Every single person in this organization has as a DEI and inclusive leadership metric on their performance review. So I don't need to encourage you. They need to call me and understand how they're going to satisfy that performance metric on their review. And so it's a different conversation when you know it's a leadership expectation in your organization. And that starts at the top of the house. There has to be some level of expectation, that says this is what leadership looks like, and this is what gets recognized and rewarded. These are the people that get promoted, the people who are able to lead high performing, diverse teams, people who have demonstrated that they've mastered the art of inclusive leadership, those who have demonstrated growth in their business by thinking about the marketplace in the most holistic way and by thinking about it at scale. I'll give you one small, very tangible example, Josh. We just acquired a bank in California, a former Union Bank, gives us deep prominence within Southern California, particularly LA, where we were before, but we're much deeper penetrated now. And I say to people all the time, there is no DEI strategy in California. I don't have a DEI strategy for California because it's California.
Okay.
60% of the residents are people of color. 40% of them are Hispanic. It's not a DEI strategy, it's a growth strategy. That is who the general market is. The general market in California are people of color. And so when you think about that, you have to have leaders who understand and have some multicultural capability and skill and capacity to understand how to serve that market in the most effective way. And you better have some cultural competency about you, or you won't be successful. That's the new reality across the entire country, by the way.
Cultural competency, such a strong phrase that I think is often missing from some of these conversations, right? Because we talk about some of the programmatic things of diversity, equity, inclusion, but if you can't respond to culture in an authentic way, then I think you're going to miss the mark a lot of the times. We're coming up, just for a time reference here for our audience, we're coming up on the portion where we're going into questions and answers. So again, I want to encourage you, if you have any, please put them in the Q&A section and we will get to them right now. So I'm going to jump into the first question that we have, and it was asked this way from Tracy. With the recent SCOTUS decision, how does that development affect your work and the environments in which your clients operate? Where do you think this leaves the future for DEI and entrepreneurs slash employees in this space?
Was that directed to me?
Both of you. You both can take a shot at it. Go for it.
I'm happy to go first. I mean,
Yeah.
the way it's affected our work is it actually is, it's forced us to double down on DEI and be even clearer about why this is important to us in terms of who we are as an organization and what we believe. But equally as important as the example I just shared with you about California is why it's important to our business. And that has to be a commitment that is not, as I said before, that is not a performative exercise. And it also means that DEI is not an exercise in human capital management. The DEI work historically has done some incredible things for organizations, for society, for individuals in our career in creating representation. But you could argue that we've gone backwards more recently in terms of overall representation. And one of the opportunities I think for DEI in the future, and I think the real future of this work, is really having this balance between, obviously it's the right thing to do, issues of equity and equality are central to this work, it's the foundation of it, but the business case of it is equally, if not more compelling. in terms of how we help organizations understand that this work is intricately tied to your existence and your future growth as an organization. And at the same time, you can do well by doing good at the same time. That's where the work, in my opinion, is pivoting to. I'd be anxious to get Amira's reaction to that. But I think we've got to do both, because that's how you get the late adopters to this work to sort of understand, what does this mean to me?
Right.
No longer can you look at a person's race and understand what drives them culturally. Like, we actually have to push this work forward so that everybody sees themselves in it. We have to help everybody understand why equity is important. Listen, one of the things that we did right after George's murder was try to understand what's U.S. Bank's role in this and how do we sort of think about it. Well, the racial wealth gap was something. We're a bank, and so that's a place where we can bring our expertise, the entire bank, to this notion of the wealth gap. And the reason the wealth gap is important is because it affects every single American. It's a drag on our economy as a whole. And oh, by the way, the wealth gap is 8-to-1 between white families and black families in terms of wealth. It's a drag on the economy as a whole. It's a drag on every single household in America. And so it was a way for us to articulate, this is why everybody should care about it. And so the more we can sort of elevate these issues of equity in a narrative that says this is why it's important to every single person, not just people of color, that's how I think we'll continue to make progress. And in the wake of the Supreme Court decision, we doubled down. You see many corporations pull back, but the reason we were able to double down are all the reasons that I just gave you.
Absolutely.
Your thoughts?
Agreed. Doubling down is the counsel that I give to clients, because it's a value statement. What do you believe and who are you? You made these commitments and promises based on something, whether it's the data, the case that you made, the moral case, the business case, the justice case. And employees and consumers expect it. We study trust, and creating trust from employees to consumers. They expect companies to play a part in equity, particularly in racial justice across the US. Over 70%. They expect CEOs to speak out about societal issues. And the thing about SCOTUS is I'm encouraging my clients to really dig into the information, because it's specific to higher ed. And while there are a lot of scare tactics being thrown about for the corporate space, it doesn't apply to us. And affirmative action within corporations was always voluntary, is still voluntary, and is rooted in data, which is the work that I do, is help companies root their DEI strategies and tactics in data, because as Greg said earlier, you can't argue with the data. And so it's also one of the legal protections, is if we can see across company X that there is a history of lacking advancement for Black Americans or Indigenous, Native American, Hawaiian, Asian Pacific Islanders into director plus roles, that is data that we are looking to correct with our DEI strategies, right? Is affirmative action is specific to data points of those who are historically marginalized and underrepresented. It's because there is an actual problem that we are creating a solution for. And affirmative action in corporate America and other institutions that are not higher ed remains a feasible solution and remains legal. And we need to double down. And that is itself a value statement. And it's so important. I think a lot about in my work, the curb cut. Some people know this. I work in the public health space as well. And curb cuts, you're walking on the sidewalk, those little yellow dots, you see the cut so that you can get your stroller, your wheelchair up the ramp, right? We created curb cuts way back when that were intentional for those with wheelchairs, but it ended up benefiting entire communities of people, those with walkers, those with walking sticks, those with strollers, those on bikes. Curb cuts is an example of the kind of work that we're doing in DEI. We're solving for one group's challenge, and it benefits everyone in some way, shape, or form. The same is true of DEI. So many people want to relegate it to, oh, that's for Black people over there, or that's for Hispanic people over there. DEI benefits everyone. And when we solve for the challenges of the most marginalized, which happen to be Black women, we solve for the challenges of everyone.
I love that approach. DEI is for everyone. It is not just race forward work. It can be, right? But it is the protection
right.
and the work of equality
Right.
and inclusion for
And it
across.
needs to start there. It needs to start with race,
Yes.
because let's talk about the history and how we got to where we are today. So it starts with us, absolutely, but it benefits
Absolutely.
everyone.
Absolutely. And that's why I say it's just not race for work, because I think that is the entry point for us
Right.
in many ways, As we get ready to close out, I want to pose this last question to the both of you all. Considering all that we talked about today, how can leaders make sure that they're implementing DE&I that doesn't come off as performative? Right. We're not kneeling in hallways with kids take cloth around us and doing this kind of stuff that is just like that does not move the needle.
Yeah.
How can we really do intentional work of DEI?
Your actions will earn you trust, and your actions have to be rooted in data. Greg said it earlier, data, 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 because the data drives the work of the chief diversity office, whether it's data specific to your organization or data specific in society. A quick example is caregivers. At the end of the month, which is in 3 days, across the US, millions of children will be without childcare spots because of a lack of investment federally and statewide. That's a DEI issue, because that impacts worker productivity and the ability to participate. And so that is a data point for companies to reimagine their benefits and features for employees that identifies caregivers, whether you're a birthing parent, a grandparent, anyone who is a caregiver to children is impacted in inequitable ways. And there are things that we can do with our benefits to provide on-site daycare, to provide stipends for those programs. And that's one way to ensure that your actions are not performative, but they're rooted in something specific, in data.
Got it. Greg, anything you want to add there?
Josh, I would just really quickly add, I'll sound like a broken record, but I think if you are a leader who's serious about this, you have to have systems of accountability. You have to have a way to hold yourself and others accountable to results and outcomes. The second thing I would say is you got to have some consistency. You really have to be able to stick with the work. You've got to be consistent. You can't bow to political noise, news media. This work is not about leaning left or leaning right. It's about leaning forward and moving the organization and society forward. And then the third thing I would say, Josh, that's really important is you got to have some stamina. You got to have some stamina in this game. Like the things that the systems, as Amira said, the systems that we're trying to change were centuries in the making, and they're not going to change in 5 years. It's one of the most sobering things about doing this work. And I think all of us have to resign ourselves as we will be able to make progress. And so celebrate the progress along the way, but there ain't no finish line coming in our lifetime, right? Like it is work that will be beneficial to generations to come. And so if you're a person who needs credit, you can't do this work. You can't do this work because this work is not about you. It's about us, and it's about those who've yet to come. And so you've got to have this notion of stamina, and it's okay to be tired. I had somebody, a young team member, employee, come up to me recently. It's like, I'm just tired, and I was like, you know what? It's okay to be tired, but you can't stop. Like I'm sure the generations and the shoulders that we stand on were way more exhausted than we are, and they've certainly had to deal with way more than we have to deal with. And so it's okay to be tired, to do whatever self-care you need to do, but then you got to pick yourself up and keep going. And so this notion of stamina, I think, is a really important thing to point out.
I love that. We can get tired, but we cannot tire out, right? We cannot give up on this one. This has been an absolutely life-giving conversation for me. So I want to thank you all so much for providing your responses, your expertise, and your perspectives. But before we kind of close it out officially, Amira, Greg, could you tell people maybe some resources that you have that they can access and maybe some ways in which they can connect with you post this conversation?
Absolutely. I'm all over LinkedIn all the time. So you can find me there. I'm often writing and speaking about these very perspectives specific to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So find me on LinkedIn. And in terms of resources, I really do encourage people to look into the trust study that we do every year. I do think it is a powerful framework for how we advance this work. So edelman.com /trust, and you'll find our trust barometer information and a bevy of other resources that my team and I provide as we counsel clients.
In the interest of time, Josh, I'll follow Amira's template. I'm on LinkedIn. Hit me up. I'll follow back. We'll talk. usbank.com /access. You'll learn all about our access commitment, which we launched in February of 2021, and you'll see all the follow-up work that we've done to deliver on our commitments that we made back in 2020. So check us out.
Absolutely. And y'all tap in with them. They offered it. Y'all tap in and connect with Amira and Greg. So as we get ready to close out, I want you to know that we too are looking for some data. That's going to be a survey link that pops up. We want you to click it. Tell us how you enjoyed this, what we can do to improve, and how we can make this better as we go forward. And speaking of going forward, we have our last session next week, session 4, Beyond the Horizon, Navigating Tomorrow's DEI Landscape. I'm super excited about culminating this next week. So same time, same place, different conversation, but just as important. See y'all next week on the road to Afrotech.
Thank you.
Thank you.